And I like to point out this, that you should never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion against injustice and lying and greed. Never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion against injustice and lying and greed. Honorable Ayah Paul Abine followed this dictum throughout his life, even when he became a politician. Honorable Ayah Paul Abine, Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine, might have fallen on December 24, 2024, that's on Christmas Eve, but his story, his legacy, his bravery, what he stood for will live on for generations upon generations to come. Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine will be remembered for so long, not because he became a politician, not just because he served the justice administration for almost 4 decades, but because he stood out in his generation. He stood for something no one will have the courage to stand for, even when he was working with them. I'll tell you this. I came to know Honorable Ayah Paul Abine closely for the first time in 2008. It was that year that Mr. Paul Biya and his apparatchiks had decided that they were going to lift the provision in the Constitution, in the 1996 Constitution, that limited presidential terms to two only, two 7-year mandates. When that project of law got to the National Assembly of La République du Cameroon, a lot of people were being interviewed. There were a lot of mixed feelings. Don't forget that there was even some kind of 4 day of serious activities, of serious striking, which led to several deaths in Douala, Yaoundé, and Bamenda, where youth came out to protest, and they actually called it a hunger crisis. Though they called it a hunger crisis, the undertones were actually this move to lift the presidential term limits from the Constitution. Of course, all kinds of war weapons were removed. At that time, I was serving as a senior journalist at the CTV national station, and of course, I was at the political desk, and I was one of those voices on Cameroon Calling. And I was also the presenter of the news, of the early morning news magazine known as Cameroon This Morning. And so there were a lot of interviews going on, and everything was being done to bring on board many people who will say how it will be a wonderful thing to lift the constitutional limits and allow the people in a democracy to freely choose whether to keep someone there or not, or to keep someone there as long as they want, as long as they consider that person to be popular. The reason for the massive opposition was because, of course, there are never elections going on in that country. They've always been selections. So at that time, Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine had just been elected to parliament, and he was in parliament on the ticket of the ruling CPDM party. He was in parliament on the ticket of the ruling CPDM party. And so, when this matter came up, his positions were unmitigated. Whatever he said, even in the build-up to this, his opposition to this particular constitutional revision was always clear. He was in total opposition. It got so bad that each time Ayah Paul was going to meet his fellow CPDM MPs from what was called at the time the Southwest region, they will be running away because each region, they usually held meetings. Members of parliament from those regions will hold meetings among themselves to come up to, common positions on certain issues. But this time, when they convene meetings, they make sure they hit the venue from Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine, because they knew his position and they did not want to associate with him because they were afraid that for somebody so opposed to this kind of thing, associating with him could spell disaster. At some point, I met him at Hotel the Deputy when he was running all over the place, searching for the chamber where a meeting was taking place of MPs of the region where he came from. And then, as we were approaching the time Parliament had to finally examine this law, there was an interview conducted with Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine. And that interview was conducted by Henry Macaulay. He was there at the assembly with another team of reporters. I think I had been there earlier in the morning and left. And so when they returned, the statements that the Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine made was so strong that when they uploaded this interview into the system, because everything was uploaded in the computer and you could just come in, you edit from there and take and put it in a cat stack and take it to the air. And so the editors who were there at the time listened to it and told Henry Macaulay and others, take this interview out of the cat stack. We don't want to hear this on the news. Now, I don't think they did, because when I came around about just close to the 7 p.m. news, among them, I think Josh Kellogg told Macaulay and others, have you caused John to listen to that interview? He may want to use it. I said, but it has been banned. They have said we shouldn't. So they just said, just let him listen to it. So when I listened to it, I said, oh my goodness, this is a member of parliament of the CPDM party. And this thing that he's saying is pertinent. He's an elected representative of the people. And so we need to let his voice be heard. And I overheard George and the others say, that certified risk bearer, if you're not careful, is going to use that interview. So I took time off. I spent time, edited it properly, arranged it, and put it in a cat stack. So when I came in the following morning, I started the news with that slot, in which Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine said, if this constitutional revision were to go through, people are looking only about the issue of term limits, but all powers are being handed over to the President of the Republic over Parliament, over the judiciary, and it's therefore going to make the executive to have a stranglehold upon the entire system of governance, and that will not help the country to go ahead. That is why I'm militantly opposed to this. That was all he said in that statement, and I broadcasted. My goodness. By late afternoon, I was called to the radio house, and when I got there, it was Alain Belibi, who was Director of Information. It was Sudoda. Called in, I think we were with Philip Bauer. I got in, I met Henry Macaulay, and said, we had to said this feed should not be used. I said, I did not see any note written anywhere officially saying the feed should not be used. And by the way, this is a member of parliament of the ruling CPDM party. This enables us to do balance. It was hell that was breaking loose. At the end of the day, I guess Henry Macaulay got so frustrated with that because I dragged him into trouble. The two of us were given 8-day suspension, what they call in French, mise à pied, with salary effect, because of Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine's determination to stand for what is right. He never wavered in the face of all forms of persecution. He simply, when he ended his mandate, simply moved into the opposition. And of course, when he stood for president, of course, it was certain that he was going to lose, but he did his. And even after that, he never ever stood down. At some point, his name was floated as a possible chairman of the SCNC. I mean, something that he finally did not take up. But even with all the torture and everything, he never for 1 minute renounced his stance for an equitable treatment of the people of the Southern Cameroons. True, he might have stood for federalism. It was his conviction. It was his conviction that in a federal system, like the one that was put in place in 1961, where the countries were treated as two states equal in status, the people of the Southern Cameroons will have the possibility to practice their legal system, to promote their educational culture, and to also, to some level, define their development priorities without necessarily having to be looking up to Yaoundé at all times. He also faced opposition from within our struggle, with a lot of us who felt that Honorable Chief Justice Ayah talks of federalism are outdated right now. The people have moved on and simply need a restoration of our country. We simply need to send La République du Cameroon out of our country and enjoy the self-determination that we so clearly and truly deserve. Despite this opposition, even from our side, the Honorable Chief Justice Ayah continues to stand for what he believed in. He was tortured. He was starved after spending 8 months in jail. And I said this before. The day on January 21, 2017, when Honorable Chief Justice Ayah was arrested, that was the day I had to be arrested. We were in the same zone. I was at my personal cabinet at Rongpo Express. That was about 3 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And he was at his home at the Tam Tam weekend, just, not far away from my place. The informant who called me and asked me to leave my office with immediate effect also had that call to make for the the now deceased Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine. But that informant simply succeeded in getting me out of my office less than 5 minutes to the time the forces invaded my office in search of my person. And by the time I got to that person, to understand, they also needed to call Chief Justice Ayah, Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine to notify him trouble was on his way. By the time we called his wife, she said he had just been picked up. So my people of Ambazonia, he spent 8 months plus in an underground cell without the possibility to receive medical attention. He was tortured, he was starved to a point never before known. And when he eventually got released, when La République du Cameroon decided it was time to, to decriminalize talks of federalism, he was never indemnified. They blocked his benefits, blocked his pensions, blocked his everything, and made sure he would not have the means to treat himself. Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine, as you can see him here, endured and endured and endured until illness took hold of him. Even in his dying circumstances, he never had the kind of attention that he deserved. I'd like us to listen to the now deceased Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine tell his own painful story in a few words.
I climbed the judicial ladder to the top, got to index 1,400. Nobody goes beyond. Saved my country for at least 4 decades, only to end up the way I am. I'm unable to foot my medical bills because not only has my pension been retained by the government without any reason, without even informing me, for close to 7 years, but for over 5 years now, my bank accounts have been frozen. Mr. President of the Republic, if I stood against constitutional amendment, I had nothing against you. It was a matter of principle. Pension is a saving, money deducted from my salary over the period of my career. It is not money I have to earn. How on earth would our government sit on my money for 7 years, even at the time that I am on the brink of the grave? Mr. President, I leave it to your conscience. You may wish to ask yourself, if I were in Paul Ayah's position, and you happen to be Paul, the wonderful preacher, the wonderful teacher, if we bear that name truly, I leave it to your conscience. I climbed the judicial.
You see this? I mean, I was finding it difficult to hold my tears as he was speaking because I imagine the pain. Some of us have gone through a lot of that too. Even at this, even at our ages, we have faced that. But you could see that even at this point, even with this passionate appeal by the Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine to Paul Biya in the public place, he was talking about conscience, talking conscience to someone who had lost it so many decades ago. Nothing was ever done. Nothing. Until he passed. While Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine was facing all these vicissitudes, someone like Mbela Moki Charles, who claims to be so protective of the place he calls Southwest Region and the people he calls Southwest Region, who says he's a senator, whom we saw run to Yaoundé to fight for the release of a rascal, a murderer, a terrorist like Moja Moja, never ever for 1 second stood in parliament or anywhere to cry, to fight for the rights of the Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine. Like you heard him say, pension is a right. He was not begging. There was money deducted from his earnings over the years. So were his savings. And that this money will be paid to him when he will be on retirement in a way as to sustain everyone. That's what pension is. Not Musonge Peter Mafani, who is by Paul Biya at the presidency of La République du Cameroun as chief of whatever, chancellor of the national orders. Not even him. Not even John Gute, who says he's prime minister, head of government. Not even John Gute stood up at any point to say, I'm fighting for this man. In total indifference, they washed him. All of them. Dorothy Limunga and Joma, all of them there, they washed him, emaciated, gradually. Mfon Mukete and even his successor, nothing. They washed. For Tabetando, who is from Manu County, just like the now deceased Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine, nothing. That is why in his message of condolence, Maurice Kamto, a citizen of La République du Cameroun, of course, was in the same call like Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine, doesn't mince his words when he attacks and literally berates, belittles the so-called ruling elite in the southern Cameroons for standing by and watching indifferently. All of them, the Atanga Ponjis, all of them, nobody, none of them. The Fukalistus gentry, they all stood by and watched him. Regina Mundi, they all stood by and watched him get right down to this point. Because just like Paul Biya, he was appealing to was no conscience, all of them too had lost their consciences. That's why Maurice Kamto says, and I like to take the French version because I saw an English translation which was not really pro. He says, j'ai appris avec émotion le décès ce mercredi 25 décembre 2024 de M. Ayah Paul Abiné, ancien haut magistrat, ancien député à l'Assemblée nationale, combattant intrépide de la liberté et des droits de l'homme, homme de conviction profondément attaché à la démocratie à laquelle il aura cru jusqu'au bout. That's Maurice Kamto, those are just eulogies saying his ability to fight for freedom and all of those. But I like to go to specific areas. So he says, pour avoir exprimé son opinion sur une question importante engageant la vie de la nation, il avait été soumis à toutes sortes de tortures physiques et morales après son arrestation arbitraire. You see, he is confirming. It is because of his convictions, his firm convictions. We heard Honorable Ayah Paul Abina himself say there that he knows where his trouble started because he opposed a constitutional revision that was meant to make Mr. Paul Biya a life president. But afterward, he also stood up to talk about the plight of his people of the southern Cameroons. And Mr. Kamto says, sa torture morale a continué malgré sa libération. Of course, he confirms, despite his being released after over 8 months in jail for nothing. Torture. The torture on him never ended. And Maurice Kamto goes somewhere where I really want to pay my attention to. He said, par ce moyen inhumain, le pouvoir qu'il a pourtant servi avec loyauté l'a laissé dépérir sous le regard indifférent de ses collègues magistrats et d'une élite anglophone aussi cruelle à son endroit que servile vis-à-vis du pouvoir, of course. That was the part that was interesting to me. And Maurice Kamto is reminding the Southern Cameroon political elite who worked with Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine. He's reminding them of their cruelty, the heartlessness with which they stood by and watched him die by day and by night, and crying and appealing. They stood by and they watched how he was going day by day. Even after he passed, I've not heard any of them raise a little finger. Because even in death, he still frightens them too much. Even in death, associating with him could still attract to them the wrath of the evil genius Paul Biya. So when you talk about conscience, you don't talk conscience to someone who doesn't have it. Because if Mr. Paul Biya had conscience, he would never even have let the person who picked power are handed to him on a platter of gold in the Republic of Cameroon to die and be buried abroad just like his wife too. He wouldn't have. Those are the kind of things that have defined the ugly relationship between La République du Cameroon and the people of the Southern Cameroons. Honorable Chief Justice Ayah Paul Abine, fare thee well. We will continue this fight. We will deliver a free and independent Southern Cameroons, aka Ambazonia, to generations of Southern Cameroonians to come. They will never experience this manner of torture and dehumanization that you and a lot of others that have gone before you and us who are still alive have been going through. They will not be exposed to that because we will fight and fight and fight until we get to where we are headed. Fare thee well, brave soul. Alita continue.